Hello everyone, this is Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and today I'm sharing with you a mixed media abstract canvas duo that I made as a Christmas gift for my best friend. I'm not yet back in my studio after Christmas. There's still people visiting and still people sleeping in there. And so I haven't made any new art since before Christmas, but I will be doing so at the beginning of 2018. I hope everyone had a fantastic, happy, fun-filled holiday, and I know I did. So this canvas was inspired by, well, my best friend lives several states away, and she was getting a new car, and so she sold me her old car, and in order to get it here to where I live, we had to drive. So I flew up there, she picked me up at the airport, and then we drove back down here, stopping at a few places on the way. And one of the places that we stopped was Arches National Park, which, if you haven't been there, it is a must-see. It's amazing and so, I don't know, so beautiful, but also surreal. It almost, in some places, seems like you might be on the moon or another planet or something. It's an amazing place. And so I wanted to commemorate that trip and visiting that place with some art that she could keep as kind of a, just, a memory of it. And so that's what this is, but it's abstract. So it's not like I took a picture that I had taken at the place and I copied it to make this art. This is more about the impressions, although at the end you can see one of the famous arches on there, and it's the Delicate arch, which is probably the most photographed and famous one. But it's not realistic in that it's not me trying to copy a photograph or something that I saw. It's more like impressions of the colors, impressions of the sky, impressions of the desert scape, the shapes. That's what makes it abstract. I'm obsessed with abstract right now. I don't know why. It's so fun. And when you're creating an abstract art piece, you still want to have balance. You still want to have, you don't want it to be just crazy. Even something as abstract as like Jackson Pollock with his kind of splatter techniques, he still had an idea of color schemes, an idea of shapes. Maybe it's a little bit harder to see in those type of paintings, but yeah, I don't know. This comes out obviously as something you can tell what it meant, I think, or what it was representing without it being an absolute copy of something or a realistic image of it, if you know what I mean. So I decided to use two canvases. Of course, I'm mailing this, and so I don't want it to be huge because I don't want to have this big, cumbersome, potentially damageable package to mail. So I decided to use two different canvases side by side and continue. I wanted to be able to have a long horizon line, but also depth for my idea. So the canvases are not the same size, and that drives my mother crazy. When I showed them to her, she was like, "Why don't you have two canvases the same size?" I said I didn't want them to be the same. I wanted it to be, I don't know, I wanted it to have an interesting shape when complete. And as you'll see at the end, each canvas can stand on its own. Like if you separated them, you could put them in two different places and it would be fine. They're not dependent on each other, but they do work together. And that's how I wanted it. So I started out with the horizon line with some black Stabilo all pencil. That's important to me. Things need to be grounded in my world. Things need to have something to stand on or something to be set upon. It bothers me if there's not. Um, that's not everyone's preference, but that's my personal preference. So I started with a horizon line, um, about 2/3 up across both canvases. And then I use some Decoart media fluid paints, and I will list the colors that I use in the description box below, with links to where you can purchase them. Um, After that was dry, and I did cool colors on the top, going upward with the 1 inch brush, and then warm colors on the bottom, going downward with the 1 inch brush from that horizon line. And then I dried that, and in places I added some of the colors from the top to the bottom and vice versa, so that it was not completely alien from each other, still a balance of color, but mostly kind of a sky, a beautiful, maybe starry sky at the top, and more of a earth tone at the bottom. So you're still getting sort of a landscape, but very abstract idea of a landscape. Then I used some golden fluid acrylic paint to do some drips. Um, First, I just used a few colors, a sienna and a teal, and I think a translucent iron oxide or something like that, to do drips going upwards and drips going downwards, also using a spray bottle. And then I got back out my straight edge ruler and used the acrylic in a fine line needlepoint bottle and put some carbon black all the way across, and then blended that. Then the next thing is I wanted to bring back in some white and a little bit more texture. So I used a palette knife and also a 2-inch soft rubber brayer to apply some of the Decoart gesso. And by doing that, it highlights the texture of the canvas again. It brings out a little bit of that, and also brings back in some light. The place that I am kind of portraying in this piece is a desert scape. So if you haven't ever heard of it, or if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should look it up. Just type Arches National Monument in the Google search images bar, and you'll come up with all kinds of really beautiful photographs of this place. It's an amazing place. The next thing that I did, I had this piece of magazine page that had some Adobe colors and some sand colors, and those were kind of my inspiration colors that I used to help me pick the warm tones of the acrylics that I used. And so I just decided to use that magazine page, excuse me, torn up, to start my collage process. I'm obsessed with collage. I love it. Then these other papers that I'm using are deli weight paper. Very useful for collage, this lightweight paper that's not waxy. It's sort of a parchment paper, but it's something different. And the pieces have acrylic paint on them. A lot of them are gel prints, using my gel printing techniques with acrylic paint. And then some of them, like in the case of this one that I'm applying right now, that is actually paint left over from when I tucked this deli paper in between two art journal pages in order to protect the pages underneath. And as I'm painting something on there, I'm getting, the overlap of the color onto the paper that's in between. And sometimes that's a really interesting paper, and that's what I'm using there. Then there's also some black, lightweight, like a text weight black paper that has gel printing on it as well, with some metallics. Now at this point I'm using matte medium, and I'm using a fluid matte medium because my favorite jar of Liquitex gel matte medium is empty. And I'm getting pretty frustrated because the pieces, when I use that gel, they want to lay down right away. And when I use these more fluid ones with some of these papers, they just keep coming back up. And so I'm getting, kind of annoyed. I'm also making sure that all the paints and everything that I'm doing to the canvas is going around the sides of the canvases so that it can be hung without a frame. It can just be, you can just take a thumbtack onto your drywall and just stick it up there real easy. I don't want anything that has to be framed or is fussy like that. I just want them to be able to be put up on the wall instantly. So this process, this collage process, obviously is completely intuitive. I'm just doing whatever makes me happy at the time. I've got lots of torn pieces of paper around, and I'm applying them. Sometimes I'm smoothing them with like a key card or an old credit card that, to get smooth the bubbles out. But I'm mostly not fussing about that. I don't mind that there's texture on the canvas. It's a collage. It's okay with me if there's some wrinkles and bubbles in the paper. I'm not completely obsessed with making it 100% smooth. It's just not really that important to me. What's more important is the shapes that I'm getting and the color combinations that I'm getting as I apply this. I want there to appear to be kind of random shapes in the background, and then this one focal image in the foreground, which is sort of the delicate arch, kind of like that. Not an absolute replica of it. And I'm repeating the colors that I used in the background as well, adding some new colors, but also definitely repeating what I already used in order to have continuity. Also repeating shapes. These are torn shapes. There's no cutting here, but I'm wanting to have those rounded arch type shapes all through the whole piece. Everything needs to be kind of rounded. Even the tall, thin pieces still have that rounded effect at the top because that's what they look like. They're worn. They're worn from millions of years of erosion and wind and rain, and so nothing is as angular as you might think. At first our brain thinks these are angular shapes. There's mesas that are flat and then they come off at angles, but really when you start to look at everything, it's very rounded and eroded all over the place. So that's why I'm using torn shapes instead of cut angular shapes in this piece. I like torn collage anyway better. So that's not the only reason, but you know what I'm saying. So I also want the two canvases to have continuity as well. So if I use orange on this side, I'm going to put some over on this side too. If I use purple over here, I'm going to put purple over here. And then in the middle where the two come up against each other, I'm tearing some of the pieces in half and putting one on one side and one on the other in order to have this fluid line of the horizon with some mountains in the distance type of effect. So I don't know, it's common sense and intuition at the same time, basically. And I keep building it up. When I first started doing torn paper collage, I covered every inch of my piece with torn paper. Like the whole background was done with torn paper. Everything was covered with torn paper. And my style has evolved into this acrylic backgrounds, sort of, with collage on the top, but not having to feel this obsession to cover every single piece of the canvas with collage. I generally do an underpainting, and in those cases, if I do like a real detailed underpainting, I will cover most of it with the collage. But in this type of an abstract application, I don't feel the need to cover the rest of it. It's just the collage is just in the the focal area of the canvas, and that's all that's needed in my opinion. So this is more fun to me than being obsessed about, the bottom left corner of the canvas, finding a piece that needs to match that, and worrying about it and fussing about it. It's more fun to just play with the strips of paper. I like it. I like it a lot better. This is another one of those canvases that I wanted to keep, and I had to send it away. I actually really liked it. That's not always the case. Sometimes I am not happy with what I produce, but in this case I was extremely happy. And I did this all in one day, although it was a long day. This process took about 5.5 hours to complete the whole thing from, start to finish. And I condensed it into 23 minutes. So as you can tell, it's very much sped up. So I decide I want some kind of faint arch shapes. I want to add in some more of these rounded shapes repetitively, and so I decide to use my Stabilo All pencil again and this spool, and I'm just using it to draw around, to just add in some weight, and also to repeat these shapes that are everywhere, And then I also use my Stabilo All pencil to add in some shadows around my collage areas, blending that with water brush, because Stabilo is a highly water reactive pencil. And I just felt the need to do that. I don't know why. I just wanted it. I wanted it to be that. So, yeah. Then I get out some PBOstudio acrylic paint in their iridescent paints, iridescent rich gold, and then also eventually the iridescent copper. And I start filling in those shapes, and I really feel that the one on the right side all the way to the edge is kind of a representation of sun. Arches National Park is in Moab, Utah, and I tell you what, it is a hottie there. It's hot. It's like where I live in Tucson. It gets very, very warm. And so I thought that having a representation of sun would enhance this memory that I'm trying to portray. However, I end up like really pushing back the rest of the circles and arches, because they started to bother me then once I decided that one on the left was the sun coming up over the mountain. Then the rest of them seemed too much forward, and so I had to reduce them quite a bit eventually. This is my fine liner bottle with titanium white golden high flow in it, and I'm using it to add some highlights to my shapes, kind of outlining a little bit in a very scribbly, not precise way. That helps to push those shapes into the background, as does this splattering, but I end up doing even more than that, which I don't think is probably on the canvas, on the video, where that one in the center in particular was bothering me, so I ended up blending it out quite a bit. So then I decided there needed to be more weight towards the bottom of the canvas, because this is a 1/3, 2/3, and it seemed like everything was on the top and there wasn't much on the bottom. And I had been using the darker colors towards the center of the entire composition, which would be on the edge of each canvas. I was kind of making an area there that was the idea that the earth continues down, that it has roots, and that this place is ancient in that it's been there forever and it has these roots. So I decided to accent that with some more collage, using torn papers that are torn in long strips with points at the end, kind of like roots would be. I felt this would help me balance the canvases because they just seemed real top heavy. Also, I added in some iridescent circular shapes with a tube, mark making with junk is a tube from the inside of a paper roll. It's one of my favorite ones. I just really like it. So then, because I had added in the iridescent paints, I didn't want to dull them down. I wanted them to remain a little bit shimmery and sparkly. So I switched the medium that I was using to a glossy medium, and it's just the Collage Page one from, I think it's from Aleene's. And I don't use glossy very often, so I ended up just putting it all over the entire canvas and sealing everything in with this glossy stuff, because if I use glossy on the bottom and then I didn't put it everywhere else, then I'd have a strange finish there. I also, on that one side, needed to add some height to the top, so I did add in a few pieces to the top to balance out the other side. Then for finishing, I just used my Stabilo All pencil again and added shadows on the right side of these roots, and then I came back in with my white fine liner and added highlights on the other side. I hope you've enjoyed this process and maybe you learned a little bit of something. Everything that I used will be just listed in the description box below. I would appreciate it if you left me a comment, if you gave me a thumbs up. If you turned on your notification bell, that would be really great. That's the new thing that I have to encourage everyone to do. And of course, share if you want to. If you want to post this on Facebook or pin it to Pinterest, that would be helpful as well. Thanks, everybody, and I will be seeing you in the next video. That's it for me. Bye-bye.